a group of Swiss retirees are taking their government to court over what they say is its failure to take stronger action on climate change. Members of the group Senior Women for Climate Protection appeared at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg earlier. It's a case activists say could mark a milestone in efforts to force governments to curb emissions. The group argues that older women's rights are infringed upon because they are most affected by the extreme heats that's becoming more frequent due to climate change.
As a senior, I'm participating in the Climate Seniors protest, and we wanted to sue for our rights, our human rights, which is what we're doing today, right? We are suing for our human right to life. And that was the idea, that with this case we want to help spur politicians into action a little bit. It's been proven that we older women are particularly sensitive to climate change. The excess mortality has been shown, because we get sick a little bit faster due to heat waves than older men or other groups.
With more on this, I'm joined by Arise International correspondent Faith Orr. Good to see you, Faith. So give us the background to this development and set out for us the legal case.
So this case has been brought by a group of 2,000 Swiss women, two of whom you saw there. Now their average age is actually 73, and over the past 6 years they have been fighting this in the Swiss courts. They've been turned down by 3 national courts in Switzerland, and that's because the courts say that Switzerland is on track to stay within the 1.5 degree limit in global warming. The women argue that it's actually more on path for about 3 degrees. Now, Strasbourg is the one court that can decide on human rights, that can decide whether this is a violation of human rights. And the women hope that the judges will be free from what they describe as political pressure, in a way that they say the Swiss courts perhaps weren't. They want the court to look at whether the right to life and the right to health is being violated by climate change. They say they're most vulnerable to it because of the increased temperatures, they're vulnerable to extreme heat, and they don't want to die simply because the government can't come up with a decent climate policy.
Well, that seems to make sense. This is the first case of its kind. How big a legal moment is this in the fight against climate change?
I think that will all really depend on the verdict. We'll get that verdict next year. If the court agrees with the women, then it is huge. It sets a precedent for 46 nations under the court's jurisdiction that climate protection is a human right. And that means that government policies will have to change across the board. Now, the women behind this say that they're not doing it just for them, that they're doing it for families, for children. Indeed, they say most of them will be dead and buried before any benefit from this is actually felt, but they want people to have a future.
And how much does this reflect a growing trend around the world? Because we seem to be seeing more people taking more cases and what appears to be growing frustration with governments not taking action quickly enough.
Absolutely. We've seen similar cases in the Netherlands and Belgium. There's also going to be 2 further cases that are linked to this case appearing in the Strasbourg court soon. Campaigners all over want governments to take action much quicker than they're planning to. I mean, even take the UK, for example. We've seen protests outside the buildings of major oil companies, shutting down motorways. People are determined to make governments listen, because I think there's a realisation now that it's not really up to individual responsibility. Sure, you can do your recycling, you can compost food waste. That isn't going to make a huge difference when big corporate policies and government policies aren't doing the same thing. They're not trying to take so much action. So I think there is that growing frustration there, people feel, and that's why there is these efforts, these cases, to try and take action on a larger scale.
And of course, looking at the assessments, I mean, we seem to be seeing more impacts of climate change, more fires, more storms. But the big question in this case is whether the right to a healthier environment is part of a human right.
Exactly, and I think there's one bit that a lot of people haven't considered yet, which is quite interesting, is that the impact it's actually having on male fertility. So we've known about this impact, I knew you would react like that. We've known about this impact for a while now, but the scale of it is becoming clear. Around 7% of men suffer from infertility, and a large proportion of that is because of pollution. Pollution, of course, emissions, all driving factors behind climate change. So we have the fires, we have the lack of snow in the Alps. In California, skiing should continue until June. We have the climate just upside down, torrential rain causing floods across Europe. But we also have the human impact. That's what these women are saying, is the impact it can have on people. And that is what the court will consider. They might not look at male fertility, but they will look at the effects on these women and the effects on elderly.
Well, given that most politicians are men, hopefully they'll giddy up. But as the world, as you pointed out there, turns alight with climate cases, there is another suit, I understand, involving the International Court of Justice being brought by Vanuatu. How important is that?
That's a major development. Now, we actually saw a big development today, not in the court, but in the UN General Assembly, which voted in favour of the resolution that was brought by Vanuatu and a number of other nations. Now, what they want to do is take the case to the court, and they want the court to investigate state crimes against the climate, and they want the court to decide, and well, not necessarily to decide, but to explore, I think, how climate change is affecting human rights and exactly what international law is needed to make governments take action. So this has been a major victory for the climate change agenda today in the UN General Assembly, which will now move to this court, and the International Court of Justice will consider this, led by Vanuatu, of course, which is an island nation, a series of islands, under major pressure. I mean, they suffered 2 cyclones in a matter of days recently, and at really, really high risk from rising sea levels. So they're very much leading this charge, but it'll be interesting to see where that one goes.
Very interesting and very informative. Faith, thank you very much indeed. Faith Orr is Arise International correspondent.